Hello everyone, if you weren't aware, I just got done with the Deltarune Chapter 5 playthrough on this channel, and so I want to make a retrospective and analysis and just talk about everything in that chapter that I didn't get the time to talk about in that playthrough because, well, you know, let's just say I didn't really get the time to communicate my thoughts because I was sucking at the game pretty bad. But alas, I'm safe now, in my element, so let's get right into it. I already did a pretty brief coverage on my thoughts and feelings about Chapter 5 on my TikTok, but I feel like the more I sat on the chapter and thought about it, my feelings have changed quite a bit. Firstly, and this is an opinion I've had since I finished the game, it's so fun. I love the side-scroller mechanic. I mentioned this in the gameplay, but I really felt like I was playing Fireboy and Water Girl all over again. It's just so fun. I'm also glad that the climbing feature made a return because there are some functions in the game earlier on that have just never been relevant ever since, like the combining items mechanism. And whilst that's not something I'm entirely bothered about, I can understand why it's jarring for some people, so I'm glad that this criticism is being built upon. And I feel like this goes without saying, but Timmy Chang and all of the artists on this chapter did their big one. It is so beautiful. The sheer amount of new facial expressions we got that are so perfectly emotive and hilarious. The amount of new animations during cutscenes. Mwah, chef's kiss. Specific shout out to Noelle's facial expressions during the weird route and the animation of her hair moving in the wind and then stopping. It's all so beautifully unsettling. I also really like how you can take the fun gang to one of the cliff edges in the 2D mode and they'll just start aura farming with the wind blowing in their hair. Also, quickly back onto the topic of mechanics, the fact that we technically got like 2 entire new game modes is so crazy to me, and they're both such a fun way to switch up the typical act until you get enough mercy to spare them formula, because that can get a little tiring after a while. But in both Yellow and Pink's game modes, you're required to think about what you're saying and what you're doing, otherwise you won't progress. And I hope we get more battle systems like that in the future because it helps keep the axe system nice and fresh. Also, slightly off topic, Pink's battle mode gives me such Your Turn to Die minigame vibes. Don't know why that is, but I love Your Turn to Die, so it's not a bad thing. But yeah, I think that's really all my inexperienced gamer ass can say on that topic. I'm sure there's someone else that can much more aptly analyze this part of the game. Unfortunately though, I'm not them. One last thing before we move on to the next topic, the music was amazing, but you didn't need me to tell you that, did ya? Now on to the meat and bones of the chapter. I really like the flowers, guys. They grew on me so much. Every single one of them. I'm so upset they're gone. I don't think it hit me at first, but upon a few rewatches, I started feeling so nostalgic for them, and I guess that makes sense because, I mean, for the first time since Undertale was released, we're getting some kind of information about the souls, who are pretty much the biggest narrative haunters right next to Kara Dreamer. And initially, I made the claim that this chapter feels a bit tonally off because of the high tension point that chapter 4 leaves on, and thus doesn't really give a reason to justify itself existing, but I take that back. Do I still think the chapter is a little misplaced for where chapter 4 left off? Yeah, but honestly, I'm fine with that now. And I definitely disagree with my take of this chapter not justifying itself existing, because it does that and then some. There's so much to talk about that I just have to start with our leading man himself, Flowey. I, like most people, started off being not the greatest fan of Flowey, but the further we got into the game, naturally he started to win me over. And a lot of that is due to just how funny and charismatic he is. But there was one scene in particular that really made me start rooting for him. And it's the scene where Ralsei prays. And this is the part where I stopped seeing Flowey as a grown-ass bum picking on a teenager who was kind of born yesterday and start seeing their bond as kind of resembling a younger brother, older brother dynamic. Because Flowey and Ralsei are fundamentally in the same position. They both seem to have an elevated of knowledge compared to the people they care about, and they both seem painfully aware of how set in stone everything around them is. And yet in every way possible, Flowey is a walking antithesis to Ralsei, because Flowey, despite knowing how hopeless everything is still willing to try for the sake of the people he cares about. And yet even though Flowey and Ralsei's goals are mutually exclusive and cannot coexist, Flowey still goes out of his way to try and help Ralsei in some weird manner. Why else would he bother trying to inspire hope in Ralsei about defying the prophecy? Why else would he care about Ralsei expressing his autonomy and choosing his own drink? I don't think he was just being facetious when he said he wanted his teasing to to help Ralsei. In fact, with the whole autonomy arc Ralsei has going on in general, Flowey is pretty much integral to it. I'd argue he's pretty much to Ralsei what Gerson was to Susie, except 90% more rage baity. But that's why it works so well. For the past 4 chapters, Ralsei has very much been a punching bag, not because the narrative doesn't take him seriously, but because he doesn't take himself seriously. He is constantly treating himself and other Darkners as lesser. And yet, despite the fact that the past 3 bosses, not counting the Titan, have done noticeably worse things to the gang than Flowey, Ralsei is uncharacteristically pissed at him the moment they meet. And it's perfect because you cannot have hatred without passion. This is the first time we are seeing Ralsei be passionate about something, and that passion being born of hatred, which is typically considered an unpalatable emotion, works even better. Ralsei's pure rage alone disproves this idea that all he is an object to be of service to Lighteners, because his anger wasn't of any service to Chris or Susie, and yet it couldn't be quelled nonetheless. And here's the thing, whilst I don't deny for a second that Flowey was putting his all into protecting the rest of the flowers, I think a part of him knew he was going to fail. And yet he still tried to inspire Ralsei nonetheless, despite him being in direct opposition of his goal, because he genuinely believes that Ralsei will be able to defy the prophecy. But before he can do that, he needs to break free of the self-loathing that the prophecy embedded in him. And you know what? It works, because despite Ralsei knowing he can't heal Flowey after he's inevitably struck down, he tries it anyways. And I feel like this will mark the end of Ralsei merely praying for the prophecy to change and actually trying to change it himself. Also, on the topic of Ralsei praying, that is an insane drop and I will talk about it later, because it has so many implications and leaves me with so many questions, but for now I'm gonna move on to the rest of the flowers. And my opinion is, I love them. They're so fun. They are such a good fun time. I know this chapter in specific has gotten flack for feeling like a fan game, and I get where that comes from because this is the first time we've gotten anything on the extremely elusive souls from Undertale, but I don't care. They're all so fun and lively, and honestly, this is the closest this game has ever felt to Undertale. Not that it's bad that the other chapters don't feel like Undertale, but hey, I'll take it. I love that we get a nice wide variety of kind of main characters. It feels like it's been a while since I've seen that. And honestly, more main characters the better. It's never a downfall for me. My personal favorites are Yellow and Blue. Not only are they nearly the most adorable couple in this entire game, second only to Suzel, Blue being a very evidently feminine black man just means so much to me. With how frequently black men are over masculinized in media, the fact that Blue gets to be soft and gentle and feminine without any remorse or being made the butt of a joke is so special to me. And Yellow is just so goddamn funny and cute. God, can someone stop Toby Fox from cooking with all his gay couples? Green is the GOAT. There's nothing more to that. I think their gag of asking everyone to pay them back is also really funny. One of the greatest mysteries in this entire game is how these flowers that were practically born yesterday all owe Green money. Seth is also totally someone's Homestuck OC, no? Chris? Can I see your search history? Orange was one of the characters I wasn't that interested in at first, but then I checked out the dialogue for the secret boss and she's so cute. She just wants to protect everyone, but she's a little girl, so they're mean to her, but it's okay. She has her big sister. On the topic of big sisters, it's not lost on me that a lot of people are upset about Pink being the secret boss because she's not all that lore relevant. Meanwhile, her entire struggle with having a soul that's incongruent with her body is practically a walking reflection of what Chris is going through. And honestly, I think the contrast compared to Pink and the rest of the secret bosses is a great microcosm for how this chapter as a whole functions. It's not all that explicitly lore heavy, it doesn't really have many secrets, but that's because, like the secret Pink battle, it's more character focused than anything. Ralsei has his autonomy arc, Susie is navigating a new relationship and trying to take more responsibility, and Chris has... well, actually, Chris doesn't have much, and that's the entire point. Other than Aqua 100% being a younger representation of Chris, which I'll get into in the theory portion of the video, Chris really gets the short end of the stick in this chapter. And whilst I'm undoubtedly sympathetic for them, I think a lot of you guys are missing the point. Chris is meant to feel like they're being left behind because they are refusing to be entirely open with the rest of the fun gang. And this is not to demonize Chris, because their situation is so much more complex than just, oh, they're refusing to communicate, but nonetheless, they are refusing refusing to communicate, most likely due to the fact that they have this friendship-shattering secret looming over their head. They're probably intentionally isolating themselves the same way they did with Noelle when they were younger. And then I come online and I'm unfortunately greeted to the sight of a concerningly large amount of Deltarune fans misconstruing the situation as Susie isolating Chris. What? Listen, Susie is not some kind of infallible angel. She has her flaws. I mean, the beginning of her arc started with her being unnecessarily cruel and aggressive towards Chris and Ralsei, but I just don't understand the criticism in this case, and a lot of it feels like it stems from people misunderstanding, once again, that the player is not Chris. We're 5 chapters in and people can't comprehend the fact that just because you wanted to take Birdie to the festival doesn't mean Chris wanted to. Chris literally screams in disbelief when you say you're going to take him to the festival in earlier chapters. And don't even get me started on Pink. You absolute LARPers. Chris doesn't even like anime. If you pick the gotta catch them all option, Chris literally does a peace sign at the camera. They don't give a fuck, bro. So no, Susie is not isolating Chris from interactions that they genuinely want to embark on just because you didn't get to engage with these characters as much as you would have liked to. Anyways, on to the more sensible yet still disagreeable side of criticism. A lot of people are blaming Susie for being ignorant to Chris's feelings of them, because this entire chapter does pretty heavily confirm that Chris has a one-sided crush on Susie. But the big thing that I think you guys are missing is that we have information about Chris that the other characters don't because we are literally in their body. Like I said earlier, Chris is known for not communicating with people, and as much as I believe that they have a deep bond with Susie, I also believe that they're intentionally keeping her at arm's length because of their secret. Again, we know that Chris has a habit of self-isolating because they did the exact same thing when it came to their friendship with Noelle. So placing the blame on characters for not being able to mind read how they're feeling like we can is just nonsensical. And it's not as if Susie just isn't looking enough, because in the weird route when Chris is undeniably not okay, Susie does everything in her power to try and make them feel better. She doesn't get mad that Chris ditched on their plans and will actually go through the festival again despite having done it with Noelle just to make them feel a bit better. And because she also enjoys Chris's presence. And let's be honest, had Chris said right there and then that they actually wanted to hang out with someone else at the festival because they were interested in them romantically, Susie would tell them to go for it. Which is why I just can't buy the narrative that Susie's being a neglectful friend when it's obvious that Chris is intentionally putting distance between the two of them. I also don't get the narrative that all Susie cares about is Noelle now. Breaking news! A girl who has had a rough life and has been treated as if she isn't worthy of love is a bit awkward and overdoes it with her first girlfriend. Are we surprised? They aren't diminishing Susie's character for the sake of Noelle, they're exploring another side of her vulnerabilities. Take the both thing for example. I think a lot of people are incorrectly reading that as the game trying to imply that Susie needs to become more feminine in order to progress. But in reality, it just seems like this is discussing another one of her insecurities. The way I see it, for the first time in the game, Susie's feeling pressure to conform with gender roles, probably because of how Carol looked down on her. She wants to be worthy for Noelle. But the game never treats that as a correct sentiment to have, which is why the second she wears the bow, she takes it off and puts it on her wrist because she doesn't like it. And she only puts it back on because it has spikes and she actually likes how it looks. And even then, we only see it on her face sprite for that one bit of dialogue. Not to mention that one Darkner at the beginning of the game who tries to imply that Susie needs to be gentrified just to be shut down by another Darkner saying that Susie is fine, rough and tough the way she is. Double not to mention, despite her not liking any of the options you give her for the dress-up outfit, she especially doesn't like you giving the tiara, resulting in a unique dialogue option. I don't know man, this doesn't feel very Susie has to become feminine presenting end goal to me. I get the fear, but trust me, I don't feel like they're gonna debutch our girl. Sorry, I kind of lost train of thought there. One last stupid thing I think people are upset at Susie for is her choice to clue Noelle into the Dark Worlds. It's crazy because there are so many people choosing to interpret it as, oh, Susie's just bringing along her girlfriend because she wants her to be included in everything, even though this is meant to be the fun gangs thing, as if she doesn't give her reasoning clear as day. Noelle is the closest person to them who also has access to these shelter codes. Noelle has also been in the Dark Worlds before, she just doesn't know it yet. And truly, even if it had just been Susie wanting to be honest with Noelle, who who can blame her? That's her girlfriend. But the fact that that has nothing to do with it just makes the argument even worse. It's like you guys refused to engage with Susie's character critically the second she stopped being Chris's special person. And it's not lost on me how a lot of the people who hold that sentiment view Chris as a man and thus are acting out on misogyny. Anyways, instead of talking about the ever-present illiterate Deltarune fans, I want to talk about Suzel! These two girls mean the world to me. They are physically, spiritually, emotionally, everythingly my daughters. The beach scene was so cute. It was so sweet as well, with Susie picking Noelle up, Noelle listening to her heartbeat. I love everything about it. And I don't understand the people who are saying that this came out of nowhere. It was known since chapter 2 that Noelle had a crush on Susie, and that Susie, to some extent, treated Noelle nicer than she treated other people because Noelle was one of the first people to show her some kindness. Then again in chapter 4, where Susie and Chris initially go to Noelle's house to find out more about the shelter code, but Susie actually ends up having a very nice sweet moment with Noelle and deciding to take action on her blossoming feelings. And then Susie takes Noelle to the festival like she said she was gonna. It feels pretty simple. Susie is someone who has evidently been deprived of a substantial amount of love for a lot of her life. She's been bullied, constantly moved around, and her parents are God knows where. A massive part of her character for this entire game has been finding people who feel like a safe space for her. It started with Lancer, then the Fun Gang as a whole, and now Noelle. I think it's so lovely how Susie's relationships continue to inspire her to be a better person. And on the Noelle side of things, I mean, just compare her conversation with Susie to her conversation with Chris in the Weird Route, and you'll see how important this is to her. In both situations, Noelle feels restricted and oppressed by her home life, missing sister, abusive mother, sick father. And yet in the normal route, Susie's presence has been nothing but a benefit for her. Susie slowly but surely is helping Noelle reclaim her life, starting with standing up to her mother. The support system she has in Susie, and maybe Chris even to some extent, is making her stronger in the normal route. Compare that to the Weird Route, and even though physically Noelle's the strongest she's ever been, mentally she's at her weakest because all of her actions are reliant on the word from this eldritch entity that is possessing her friend. There is very much an intentional parallel drawn between these two conversations to emphasize how much healthier Noelle is in the normal route. And Susie is such a massive part of it, and yet all I'm seeing is people being doom and gloom about their relationship. People saying that Susie is unhealthily obsessed with Noelle when in reality she's just insecure about her ability to love because of her trauma. And also, she's a teenager. Big surprise, teenagers get fixated on their love lives. Or saying that Noelle doesn't actually love the real Susie and is merely infatuated with her. Dude, I think you're a few chapters too late. It's almost as if their relationship has progressed the more they hang out. I don't know, man. It just sucks to see so much vitriol for a relationship that the game goes out of its way to show us as beneficial to both of the characters' developments. Do I think everything is gonna be entirely smooth sailing for Suzel? No, because this is Deltarune and no one can be happier for more than 20 minutes. But I just don't agree with the way everyone is presenting Suzel as something that is suddenly entirely damaging to both of these characters. Leave my daughters alone! I love Suzel and I think they work perfectly for one another's character arcs. Noelle helps Susie be more vulnerable and Susie helps Noelle be more confident. Or should I say, stronger. Let's talk about the Weird Route. It's horrifying! What do you mean I just watched these two teenagers drown themselves? I didn't think it could get worse after chapter 4! Silly me, little did I know. I'm gonna be so honest, I thought they were dead at first. I thought they were dead and gone and we just watched two delusional teenagers commit suicide. But considering that the last sprite we see of Noelle's when you take the filter off isn't underwater, thankfully, I guess, I don't think that's the case. I think what happened is that the other side of the lake is actually meant to be the bottom of the lake and that there is a dark world beneath everything. That probably had a part to play in Des's disappearance, and that's what they mean when they say they're going to the other side of the lake. Not horizontally, vertically. And this part of the Weird Route has given birth to another theory that is basically Chriselle Night theory. The idea that we're in a time loop and the night has actually been Chris and Noelle's amalgamation all along, and that this is the starting point of that time loop. And the thing is, I like it, but I don't like the time loop aspect of it. And maybe that's just a personal bias, but I'm thinking, if whatever happened to Des happened at the lake, and we just saw with our own eyes Noelle and Chris also drowning in the lake, is it possible that Des got snowgraved into being the knight and that in the weird route, Cryselle is going to form a new knight? I don't know. I'm gonna be honest, I feel like I'm talking out of my ass, but I'm gonna keep talking anyways. The biggest analogy I got out of Noelle's behavior in the weird route for chapter 5 is that it heavily resembles how people are taken in by cults, right? Noelle is a young and vulnerable person who is leaving everything behind in order to have a happy life with this unspoken entity. People in cults are often expected to give up their belongings in order to have a happy afterlife with their idol of worship, as we see in the case of Noelle giving Susie that fat stack of money before she descends to the other side of the lake with Chris, the person she worships, or rather the player. It's also a behavior in suicidal people which, when you consider how much the Dark Worlds are associated with unhealthy escapism, yeah, I can definitely see that. Anyhow, I bring all this up because I wonder if some entity like the Soul, probably Gaster related, similarly mind broke Des the same way that we broke Noelle, probably taking advantage with the tumultuous relationship she's implied to have with her mother. I doubt it'd be a one-to-one situation with how it goes down in the weird route, but I don't know, some part of me really believes that she walked into that lake, hearing the words proceed in her ear, and continued to walk and walk and walk until the water swallowed her whole and she fell to the other side of the lake, aka the Dark World at the bottom of it. And somehow, some way, that turned her into the Knight, which is what we're about to learn in chapter 7, side B, and most likely the footsteps Cryselle is about to follow into. And the craziest part about all of this is I'm truly going off a gut feeling. Hell, the dialogue that Asgore gives us about the Dark Worlds might even deconfirm the fact that it's even possible for Des to be the Knight, but something in my heart is telling me it might be along those lines and I'm gonna stick with it. Theories aside, let's talk about some more miscellaneous things in the chapter. First of all, Ralsei praying. That's massive, right? The game just casually, well, not casually at all, but admitting nonetheless that Ralsei prays all the time kind of shocked me. Who is he praying to? The prophecy? Is there a creator of the prophecy? Is it linked in any way to the church and hometown? The titular Deltarune? I don't know, but between this and Noelle and the weird route, religion is becoming a pretty heavy theme in this game. That also really makes me want more Ralsei-Noelle interactions. Asriel has what I assume is love letters in his draw to Death, which is really cute and also really sad. The weird route confirms that Chris is the one narrating for us, which I felt like I kind of knew, but seeing it explicitly confirmed is really funny. Not in the weird route, but in the normal route because it makes all of those sassy dialogue options so much more funny. Banging sermon, my man. Also, where the hell was Chris at the beginning of this chapter?
Chris, what the fuck are you doing?
Why are they climbing through our window looking green as hell? It probably has something to do with the shelter. My headcanon is that they went and egged Carol's house. On the topic of Chris doing sketchy shit, Chris, what are you doing with those poisonous seeds? Put them down, put them down! Jokes aside, the first thought I immediately had when I saw that scene was when Kara accidentally put buttercups in the cake for Asgore. Chris is either planning to poison someone else or themselves. Unfortunately, it's most likely themselves. As I said earlier, it's very evident that Chris is isolating themselves, probably to cope with their massive secret. And I fear I wouldn't be too surprised if they're planning to take their own life before they can be exposed. Oh my god, can someone give this kid a hug? What the actual hell? Oh, and on top of that, it becomes very obvious whenever love is mentioned in this chapter that Chris has a massive crush on Susie. And you might be thinking, wow, this kid's life sucks. Not only do they have all this shit on their plate, they also are struggling with an unrequited crush. Now that's where you're wrong. Because the trajectory of Chris's love life has already been foreshadowed by none other than the Great Rules card. Yes, I fully believe that Chris, Susie, and Noelle are gonna get into a polycule. Fight me. Oh, but Digi Rules ends up fumbling the polycule. Yeah, because Rules card is a loser. Chris is not. They're not gonna fumble this. I won't let them. Always bet on Cruzy Cell Cannon. I don't give a shit. God damn it, I lost my train of thought again. I really need a script. Aqua is young Chris. Did I say this already? Well, if I did, I'll just delete it. All of the flowers have some sort of very intentional relation to the values from the ball game in Undertale, which are accepted to be the traits of the fallen children as the common consensus. And the big part of these flowers' roles is that whilst they try, they ultimately fail to embody those traits wholeheartedly because they're not humans. But the attempt is still there nonetheless. Orange, despite being a scaredy cat who has to tattle to her big sis when she gets picked on by Ralsei, still attempts to be courageous with all of her might. She wants to be brave to protect everyone else. Yellow, despite having a mind that's easily influenced and a heart that's effortlessly swayed, especially when it comes to blue, still attempts attempts to enact justice. Blue makes a point to mention integrity in his dialogue constantly, and whilst he might be a little bit deceptive at times, ultimately he always advocates for one being integral to their own hopes and dreams, which is why he never demonizes the Fun Gang for opposing him, because he understands at the end of the day, just like him, they're being authentic to their own wants. Seth is constantly being foiled and thwarted, and sometimes it's even their own teammates screwing them over, and yet no matter what, they don't really give up. They might retreat and recuperate for a bit, but they'll always come back. In fact, aren't they the flower that we fight the most? Also, they are notably the only flower that doesn't go by their color, perhaps showing perseverance to the bit of being a human. And green is kindness, just spot on, there's really nothing to critique there. Even if everyone somehow owes them money. The point being, even if the characters aren't all that good at it, because again, they're not humans, a massive part of their existence is trying to embody these values. And that applies for all of them. Except, well, Aqua. Yeah, no matter how hard I try and twist it, patience is just not a part of Aqua's theme as much as all of the other values are for the other characters. If anything, she feels like the antithesis to the trait, which isn't exactly the same as trying to embody it and failing. And here's the thing, each of these traits that the flowers are trying to be comes from the Undertale ball game. And the flag and description you get that corresponds with the patience soul isn't labeled Aqua, it's labeled light blue, which is another discrepancy right off the bat. And so I'm left thinking, why does Aqua feel like the odd one out here? And then I started thinking more. Aqua isn't the only blue character here. Chris is also blue. Okay, Aqua also has a ribbon on her head that really resembles a red soul, kinda like the red soul Chris has. Alright, Aqua uses knives as her weapon of choice. So does Chris. Okay, but that's all superficial, right? It doesn't have to mean anything. But then, Chris is the same color as Aqua in Asgore's flashback. Chris was described as a mischievous prankster when they were younger, and it is heavily implied Chris used to go to art therapy to help with violent tendencies. Oh yeah, if you're wondering where that came from, in the Chapter 4 Egg Room, we go to the hospital in Hometown and we enter a black room where somebody greets us saying that this is art therapy where we draw and try not to kill each other. And the game frequently makes a point of establishing that Aqua doesn't really understand the difference between pain and love, thus leading to her acting violently. Not to mention, when you do the flowery talk with Aqua and Chris, it ends with Aqua asking Chris why they can't do magic. A sentiment younger Chris most definitely had, if anything is to be gauged from them constantly wearing the red horned headband in order to fit in, and their search history involving how to do magic. And this is what I mean when I say, despite this chapter not being overtly lore heavy, it gives us so much information about these characters hiding in plain sight. What do you mean we have a representation of young Chris walking around? That becomes especially more potent when you remember this Dark World was made by Chris, not Asgore, so that's basically how they perceive their own younger self. And whilst it's probably not something that'd ever be explicitly confirmed or denied, I still think it's a valid enough way to gauge information about Chris's childhood. For example, it gives us more insight into their gender identity. Is it possible that Chris used to identify more femininely as a child? Or the fact that it implies that Chris's violence as a child didn't come from a place of malice, but rather from a lack of understanding. Honestly, I'm just happy anytime we get more information about Chris. I really liked being able to humanize them. Whilst we're on the topic of humanizing Chris, I know that might seem random, but just stick with me. I'm honestly not sure what the general consensus is about why the Knight is taking people, but the way I see it, the Knight knows how to open the shelter, so it's taking out other people who also know how to open the shelter. Hence why Undyne and Asgore were taken, but Napstablook wasn't, because as chief of police, they probably have access to shelter codes that he doesn't. And the three symbols outside of the shelter are meant to correspond to different factions of Hometown that would have access to the shelter codes. Pine Tree for the Holiday family, hence why there's a code in Dessa's guitar. The police badge probably symbolic of the code we find in Asgore's flowers. And last but not least, presumably the last bit of the code we're missing, the code associated with the Deltarune or the church. All this to say, I think it's more than plausible to assume the Knight wanted to take Toriel in Chapter 3. I know a lot of people say she was just bait for Undyne, but that doesn't really make sense because Undyne was coming regardless due to Chris slashing their tires. And honestly, I don't think the Knight needed to try and magically beam Toriel up to look suspicious. I think Undyne would have come on 10 anyways. And how does this relate to Chris and humanizing them, you might ask? Well, I wholeheartedly believe Chris set up Undyne in order to stop the Knight from taking Toriel. Here's the thing, as we established, the Knight probably did intend to take Undyne at some point, but I don't think it was meant to go down the way it did. Here's the thing about the Knight, right? They don't act like some kind of cool, calm, collected, omnipotent, all-powerful being. Rather, they act like a real hothead. They're brash, quick to anger, and you can tell that they're easy to spite. And I think Chris intentionally played on that by luring luring Undyne to their house earlier than she was meant to be, knowing that Undyne would piss off the knight, hopefully long enough for them to forget about Toriel entirely and just focus on taking Undyne. Which, in its own fucked up way, is kind of sweet. I always do like moments where, even in the extremely fucked up situation they're in, you can see bits of humanity bleeding through Chris. Like, yeah, okay, maybe they're helping plan the end of the world, but they did sacrifice a random woman so that their mom would be protected. Chris is a Mama's Day confirmed. As for Asgore, well, that's for all the times you made Chris deliver your flowers to Toriel. No, jokes aside, I'm sure if they could have set up something to save Asgore, they would have. I just don't think they were in a position to. Anyways, wow, that was a long tangent, but I just had to get this theory out there because I think it's really bittersweet. Anyways, back to the video. On the topic of Chris and their childhood and violence, what the hell did Caddy do? Rather, what the hell did the three of them, Caddy, Chris, and Noelle, do as kids that has Caddy asking if Chris is enacting revenge on her? Was Caddy the one who introduced Chris to Dark Fountains and that's how Chris has a save before we even arrive in chapter 1? I'm guessing the three of them used to be friends until Des disappeared and Chris started isolating themselves. Did Caddy interpret this as them blaming her for opening the fountains? Or maybe it's a lot less extreme and has something to do with the shelter instead? Regardless, Caddy thinks Chris is blaming them for something probably related to Des, and I am so desperate to know what. Did Rudy actually fall down? Or did Carol possibly lie to get Noelle away from Susie? Because we do see Rudy at the end of the weird route, and whilst it does look like the wind has been taken from him a bit, he doesn't necessarily look like he's in critical danger. That would be really fucked up if she did though. Could also be that whilst Chris was face down on the table, they were actually secretly texting her for an opening and she did that, which, hey man, that betrayal arc is gonna hurt really bad when it comes around. Anyhow, I think that's all there is to say on what is actually in the chapter, so now I can move on to the theory review. What do you mean I missed something? I didn't miss anything, I've checked off every... Oh. Apparently, we got the fucking mafia in the game now because I am so sure that these niggas cut up Onion-san and sold him as food to teenagers at a festival. It's only 2G? Nah, we got you, nigga. We don't use G in this world. Get back to Undertale. You guys remember how Onion-san was talking about how he heard a song coming from the bottom of the lake and then he went to investigate it and then he disappeared for a chapter and all of a sudden we have onion-flavored sweets sold by the Gaster NPCs? This is kind of like the first confirmed death, right? Because Des is technically just gone missing. Meanwhile, they're cutting up Onion-san and serving... Oh my god. I can't do this. Is this Hikamori route? I'm getting flashbacks. And for the sweet, naive people who think that Onion-san is safe because monsters turn to dust in this universe, I don't think they do. 1, Susie bleeds, but also 2, Asgore says he wants to parade the knight's body around town. You can't parade a body if the body is dust. So either 1, Asgore is assuming that the knight is a human, which I don't think is the case, but would make for some pretty interesting conversations about the political tensions between monsters and humans in this world. Or 2, monsters don't always turn to dust when they die in this universe. Maybe it's a when they grow old thing, maybe Gerson was just cremated. What I'm trying to say is there's a very high likelihood of Onion-san being in the food that Susie put in her mouth, because I made Susie try it. She's my guinea pig. But you know who else is missing from this chapter that I've not seen anyone talk about? Monster Kid and Snowdrake, who, may I add, were caught by Chris and Susie creeping around the shelter, a place heavily associated with Gaster, and yes, whilst they were present in chapter 3, chapter 4, they've seemingly gone missing without a trace in chapter 5. And everyone is at the festival, especially from Chris's class, yet there's no explanation for them being absent. Kind of like how Onion-san went missing without a trace in the chapter right before there suddenly started being onion-flavored takoyaki. And the final nail in the coffin for me thinking that something bad has happened to these two is that Monster Kid has a goner counterpart in Undertale. Oh my god, Snowdrake, run away, you are so cooked. You know how Toby Fox said Deltarune came to him in a dream? I'm starting to think it was a nightmare. That was supposed to be the last thing, but I completely forgot, ironically, about the don't forget picture from Sans. That is definitely the picture from Undertale that he has in the back of his house, right? Which, beyond being a really cool callback, I feel like this inevitably implies that Sans and the Fun Gang are going to get closer. I feel like by the time he winds up in Undertale, that image has to have some sort of emotional value to him, right? It wouldn't make sense if it was just a picture of some random kids. I guess if you squint, it could be the last thing he has of Toriel, even if it's not of her, but rather of her kid that he doesn't get along with. I don't know, I like my theory better. I'm all for Sans being a stepdad as long as he gets his act together. Oh, and for all the people who are saying that this is proof the weird route is canon, because in the normal route, Susie draws 4 people, the fun gang plus Noelle, but in the weird route, she only draws the fun gang. I counter, in the weird route, she's asked to draw herself and her friends, but in the normal route, she's only asked to draw her friends, meaning it'd be 3 in both cases. You call it copium, I call it the white pen known as hope. But yeah, that's the end of the video. I was originally gonna do a segment where I review some theories that you guys submitted to me, and then there ended up being like 100+ responses. I'm so sorry, that's gonna have to wait for another video, but let me know if you want to see it nonetheless. Anyways, I'll see you guys, and don't forget, always Deltarune.